Hello, everyone. Welcome to another rising sign horoscope. I am Dr. Claire Moon of Aligning Light Astrology, and today we're going to be talking about Venus's retrograde starting on March 1st. That's going to extend until April 12th of 2025. A little caveat section before we jump into everything. I just want to talk about how best to use this information. So first things first, the Venus retrograde babies in the room. If you have Venus retrograde in your birth chart, like it's you don't have to, your threat assessment, if you got one, you can dial it down a few notches. Venus retrograde, any retrograde, does not seem to affect the people who have that in their birth chart nearly as much as the rest of us in difficult ways. So you get, a little bit of help there. I just want to point that out. Also, usually I say this at the beginning of all of my videos, the timing matters way more than just transits. So we've got a bunch of other timing techniques in astrology. We've got profections, zodiacal releasing, decennials, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't matter what they are. The point to know is that they're going to make it so that sometimes Venus is louder some years and quieter other years. So for some of us, this also is not going to be the biggest story of the year. So if anyone's getting more concerned than they are curious, getting more into that, my brain is making up a bunch of scary stories about the future. I just want to throw in some of these caveats that, like, you may not be having to worry about anything. And so I just want to throw that out there. Go find out your rising sign. So, no shade against sun sign astrology, but with rising signs, I can get much more specific about which areas of your life this is going to affect the most. So go check that out. Astrodienst, Chani Nicholas's website. There's a bunch of chart generators. AstroSeek is another good one. And of course, as I mentioned, concern versus curiosity. Try to be curious about stuff. It's hard. I also get nervous. It's our brains are made to, take any information possible and then construct some story that we can feel certain about, whether it's about the past, the present, or the future. So if we notice ourselves slipping into that story making that goes beyond what we really know, beyond the context that we have, just remember curiosity. Oh, well, what will happen? I'm excited to find out, what could this be about? I wonder, are we going to see Venus operate how I think that they're supposed to be operating in this situation? I guess we'll find out together. So I know that that's way easier said than done. Some people got difficult stuff in their chart. Just try not to get into a difficult, suffering mind state. And if you do find you are, email me or put it in the comments below. My email is aligninglightastro@gmail.com. My website is www.aligninglightastrology.com. You can find any of my services on there. I also have resources for student astrologers. I've got my newsletter sign up. You can sign up for my newsletter. I send it out once a month. I'm about to send out my next one, so definitely get signed up if you want the next month's discount code. Usually the discount codes go in the newsletter. So check that out. Right now, my discount is Star Student for 15%. I think it's 15, maybe it's 10% off tutoring services. Any of my tutoring or mentoring services. Star Student is that. And then I think that's all my caveats, announcements. I am still booking, of course, always booking sessions with people. It's the best way to support my work. Hit like, hit subscribe if you want to keep up with this. And if you do like how I talk about things, how I explain things, of course, feel free to book a reading and then we can get really specific about your chart. I think that's it. I think that's all I have for announcements. With that, yeah, let's get into the meat. So we're going to be talking about Inanna, who is Venus. And I'm going to be talking about the myth of Inanna's descent into the underworld. Inanna was also later as culture changed and evolved, became known as Ishtar, another name Astarte, Venus, Aphrodite, all of these same same set of themes, same goddess, same archetypes. Maybe I shouldn't say it's the same goddess. It's not quite the same goddess. There's this whole evolution of all of these archetypes of who we now call Venus, or who we refer to as Venus. But today I'm going to be using the word Inanna much more. So just know that that's who I'm talking about. Whenever I say Inanna, I'm really talking about Venus. Whenever I talk about Venus, I'm really talking about Inanna. There are some content warnings and trigger warnings today. I talk about the loss of relationships, the loss of people, grief, mourning. There's some pretty graphic parts of the underworld journey. So get ready for that. If you're not into like violent verbiage or speech, there is a moment of there's some violence. So that's going to be in there, in the myth when I'm talking about the myth. And then there's also some like sexy, spicy things as well. Content warning. I've got some links below to some reading on these myths of Inanna. I personally love the spicy stuff, and I can't say it out loud on YouTube. Otherwise, I'm going to be too spicy. I'm not going to monetize this one because like I just don't want any conflicts of like the resources I'm using. All to say, check out the links and content warnings. They exist for this one. If you're going through difficult stuff relationally, or even like with death or end of life, and the way that our relationships fundamentally change when people die, there are hints of that in today's content. So yeah, that's all my stuff. So let's talk about this myth. Now, we do need a little bit of backstory on Inanna's descent. They don't just up in one day decide they're going to do this for no reason. And this is actually where we run into our first set of differences between the variations in this myth. So even before I get to the backstory, it is worth noting that there are two main versions to the myth of Inanna's descent into the underworld. There's the Sumerian myth, which is earlier in the tradition or earlier in history chronologically, and then there is the Akkadian version, which is a little later. They have variations in the plot lines. There's a lot of similarities, but there's a few differences as well, which I will try to name. And so if you're out there and hearing different astrologers talk about this journey of Inanna, and you're getting different things, or maybe people are saying Ishtar instead of Inanna, that's another way to know you've got the Akkadian version versus the Sumerian version, is that all the names of the people and the gods are a little bit different based on those different cultures and time. So, backstory, and this is where our first difference is. Why did Inanna go to the underworld? They had a perfectly decent life in the upper world with Dumuzi, their husband. Why would they do this? So, in the Sumerian myth, it's worth knowing that they go to the underworld because their sister's husband died. So they were going to go down to allegedly be part of this mourning process. Okay, that's all fine and good. But then we have to know that Ereshkigal, who is Inanna's sister, Ereshkigal is the queen of the underworld, she was married to her first husband, the Bull of Heaven. So Ereshkigal is married to the Bull of Heaven. Now, at some point in time, enters the chat Gilgamesh. If you've heard of the Epic of Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh was this other Mesopotamian god. At some point prior to this underworld descent, Inanna and Gilgamesh had a disagreement. I can't tell from my short amount of research, and this looks like there's some variations or some unknowns in what happened here as well. Was it Inanna that made a pass at Gilgamesh and Gilgamesh rejected Inanna? Or was Gilgamesh rejected? Either way, Inanna left the situation upset. What Inanna did was they asked the Bull of Heaven to go rough up Gilgamesh and get some kind of retribution. Unfortunately, and actually this is where I will share one of the first images I found, and this is just from Wikipedia, so like this is not anything too intense, but we can see Gilgamesh here, who is doing like a full Nelson on this poor Bull of Heaven, who is again Ereshkigal's first husband. So this does not turn out well for the bull. And of course, Ereshkigal is going to be upset. That was her husband. So she's mourning. This is why then, when Inanna goes down into the underworld, which we will get to, her reception is not going to be amazing. And just to cut to the chase, Ereshkigal does not respond kindly to Inanna showing up. So again, just knowing that backstory really helped me understand why Ereshkigal's response was what it was when Inanna descended. There's this other school of thought, which does not seem to come from any of the original text of the story, that Inanna might have been going to the underworld to conquer it or to take over her sister's throne. Um, you can take what you will from that. I don't notice that in the reading of it myself. So, with that background, now we know why they're doing this, why Inanna is doing this. So, the rest of the story unfolds. We have Inanna, who is getting ready to go to the underworld, and I'm actually going to just read this. Let me share it with you. So, this is I don't think this is like the best translation. I'm not sure, but it's the Wolkstein Kramer translation of the Descent of Inanna. And I'm not going to read all of it, but I do want to read some of it, and I have it here for people to follow along if they want. So, and there's a lot of repetitiveness too, and I think this goes just with the notion that these types of texts were likely written by priestesses, priests to a god. And so there's a lot of, it's very reverent and it reads like a sacred text. It kind of reminds me of suttas in the way that they repeat stuff so much. But it starts with, from the great above, she opened her ear to the great below. From the great above, the goddess opened her ear to the great below. From the great above, Inanna opened her ear to the great below. My lady abandoned heaven and earth to descend to the underworld. Inanna abandoned heaven and earth to descend to the underworld. And then it goes through and says all of these cities that Inanna was in charge of and had temples to her in those places, and saying that she has abandoned those temples to go to the underworld. She gathered together the 7 May. I think that's how you say it, May, me. I'm not exactly sure. But what it is, the May, I'm just going to call it that, are these magical powers and objects that are basically part of Inanna's utility belt. If Inanna were Batman, they would have like these powerful tools, these powers. And there's also, I'm going to link it below, a side story about Enki and Inanna and all of these powers. And there's some spicy details. Check it out. Anyway, she gathers up her 7 powerful things. And with the May in her possession, she prepared herself. And then it has her going through this whole dressing process, putting on these powerful objects of Shigura crown. I love this. She arranged the dark locks of hair across her forehead. It reminded me when I was reading that about like when women put their baby hairs really beautifully around their face. She tied small lapis beads around her neck. So lapis lazuli was like this blue stone. There's a royal robe. There was a breastplate. There was a bracelet, a measuring rod, and line, which I think there's some symbolism there about, you think about Libra and being this intellectual realm that's always measuring the weights and balances of things. So with all of her powers, she set off for the underworld, and she had this servant named Ninshabar, who helped her with everything. And Inanna gives Ninshabar all of these instructions saying, hey, if I don't come back in 3 days, please do all of these things to try to bring me back. Lament, beat a drum, circle the houses of the gods, tear at your eyes, your mouth, your thighs. So like mourning, like physically, like mourn my loss. Dress yourself in the single garment like a beggar. So this whole mourning process that she instructs her assistant to do if she doesn't come back in 3 days. And then instructs them to go to 3 different gods. First Enlil, then Nana, who is the moon, and Inanna's father, I believe, and also Father Enki. So these gods, these three gods, go to them, see if they'll help me out if I don't come back in 3 days. Then Inanna gets to the underworld gate. They arrive at the gates. She knocks loudly. She asks for the gatekeeper, Nettie, who opens the door. So Nettie, this gatekeeper, they ask Inanna who they are, and Inanna says, I am Inanna, Queen of Heaven, on my way to the east. Now, this is interesting. In the east, what's that about? Because, right now, Inanna's or Venus is in the west. But one thing I haven't really mentioned yet is that this whole myth is here because it helps us in part to understand the journey of Venus in the sky, going retrograde, becoming invisible, reappearing, going through these seven gates into the underworld. All of that happens in real time if you watch Venus over the weeks that this is all going on. So right now, Venus is in the evening sky. They will eventually disappear and they will reappear in the morning sky in April. Anyway, back to Inanna. They are entering the underworld, and this is where they say, Inanna answers, why are you traveling here to this land where no traveler returns? Because this idea is when you go into the underworld, you ain't coming back. It's like a one-way ticket. Now, Inanna answers, because of my older sister, Erishkigal, her husband, Gugalana, the bull of heaven, has died. I have come to witness the funeral rites. Let the beer of his funeral rites be poured into the cup. Let it be done. So then Nettie goes and tells Erishkigal. There's a whole thing there about Inanna's, all of her all of these powerful objects. When Erishkigal heard this, she slapped her thigh and bit her lip. She took the matter into her heart and dwelt on it. And then she spoke, Come, Nettie, my chief gatekeeper of the Kur, heed my words. Bolt the seven gates of the underworld, and then one by one open each gate a crack. Let Inanna enter, and as she enters, remove her royal garments. Let the holy priestess of heaven enter bowed low. Nettie heeded the words of the queen. They then went to Inanna and had Inanna go through these seven gates. So then the rest of the story is through each of these gates, Inanna is asked to remove one of her items, and Inanna asks, What is this? And Nettie says, Quiet, Inanna. The ways of the underworld are perfect. They must not be questioned. It sounds very much to me like Severance. Like the work is very mysterious and important. So she goes through all these gates and she ends up naked at the end of it. And this is where I wanted to quote someone that I found on Wikipedia, but it was a great quote from Professor Zeneb Barani, who is a professor of ancient art, Near Eastern archaeology. And she talks about how the nakedness of Inanna was not seen as like a like the nakedness was not a weakness itself. The nakedness was not necessarily this means of humiliating Inanna. It was more seen as this preparation to go into the underworld. Now, her powerful royal regalia and garments being removed, that was the act of removing her power. But the nakedness itself, I thought that was really fascinating to consider that, let's make sure we're not putting our Western kind of body shaming onto this, that nakedness is also a part of getting ready for a really important spiritual rite or ritual. So I just wanted to mention that because I thought that was fascinating. Now we've got Inanna, who has been stripped of all of their seven garments, powerful items, enters the throne room. Erishkigal rises from her throne. Inanna starts toward the throne. And then all these underworld judges just surround Inanna and stop her from going to Erishkigal's throne. And this is where it gets pretty rough. And Erishkigal kills Inanna, turns her into a corpse, puts her on a meat hook. And now this is where, okay, she didn't come back in 3 days. And Ninshibur is going to be doing all of these things that Inanna instructed them to do before she descended. So do all of these funeral rites, lamentary type grieving things, and then go to Enlil, ask for help. Enlil says no. Uh, then they went to Inanna, who also said no. And then they went to Enki, who said, I guess I should go back too, because it's really interesting how they respond compared to how Enki responds. So Ninshibur cries out, "O Father Enlil, do not let your daughter be put to death in the underworld. Do not let her bright silver be covered with the dust of the underworld. Do not let her precious lapis be broken into stone for the stoneworker. Do not let your fragrant boxwood be cut into wood for for the woodworker. Do not let the holy priestess of heaven be put to death in the underworld." Father Enlil answered angrily, "My daughter craved the great above. Inanna craved the great below. She who receives me of the underworld does not return. Oh, she who receives the May of the underworld does not return. She who goes to the dark city stays there." Father-in-law would not help. And then the whole same thing with Nana, this thing about rejecting this cry for help. But then we get to Enki, and Enki doesn't respond with that. Enki doesn't say, they wanted the above and then they wanted the below. It seems like they wanted too much. That's not what Enki says. Enki says, "What has happened? What has my daughter done? Inanna, queen of all the lands, holy priestess of heaven, what has happened? I am troubled, I am grieved." And then from the dirt underneath his fingernails, Enki creates these two beings that are going to help this whole process of getting Inanna back into the upper world. And there's a whole thing, I'm not going to get into it here, but there's this whole thing about gender and these beings being not gendered. It's discussed a lot. I don't understand the significance of it, so I'm not meaning to ignore it, but because it's very fascinating. I just don't know how to how to add anything of worth there. But just know that these two beings, they are sacred special beings, and they're going to go to the underworld, and their names are the Kurgara and the Galatur. These two words. These are the beings, then their names. And they go to the underworld, they sneak in, and they meet Ereshkigal. And Enki has given them instructions about how to meet Ereshkigal, because they go down and they find Ereshkigal. These two beings find Ereshkigal moaning, crying, bereaved. Now, I think it would make sense that she would be crying about the pain of losing her husband, the bull of heaven. But there's this other notion that Ereshkigal is expressing the pain of the world, essentially, in a lot of ways. Queen of the underworld is moaning with the cries of women about to give birth. Basically kind of giving this opposite expression of someone who's covered in these royal, powerful garments. Here we have Ereshkigal, who is uncovered, who doesn't have any linen, who doesn't have her hair neatly, put around her face. She's crying about her insides, her outsides. And what is so fascinating is that these two beings empathize with her, and they say the same thing that she's saying. They it's like a call and a response with Ereshkigal's pain. And then with that, Ereshkigal, okay, so here's this whole thing. She's moaning and crying out, and these two beings are crying out along with her. And then all of a sudden, Ereshkigal stopped. She looked at them. She asked, "Who are you? Moaning, groaning, sighing with me." And then she offers to bless them, give them a gift, give them all of these certain gifts. And they kept turning them down. And then Ereshkigal says, "Well, what do you want?" And this was all a trick, basically, to get Ereshkigal to offer them a gift. And then they were going to be like, "Well, the one thing that we want is Inanna. So give us Inanna back. We're going to sprinkle some miracle grow on her, the waters of life, the food of life." And then that brings her back. So then we think, okay, we're out of the woods. Inanna's back to life. These beings have helped her. Not to mention this whole thing that is worth its own discussion about the symbolism of empathizing with someone who's in pain, and then the magic that can come and the healing that can come uh, with that. Like, I thought that was really beautiful and important. Anyway, Inanna, they're alive. They've gotten sprinkled with the waters of life and the food of life, and now they're going to ascend. But before they can, all of those underworld judges rush back in. They surround Inanna and they say, not so fast. We need a replacement because remember, no one just comes here and then leaves. We're going to need you to bring someone back. So then they send these demons up with her. And this was also fascinating to me because the description of these demons, as Inanna ascends from the underworld, these demons cling to her sides, and these demons are not going to let her go until she finds a replacement person to send back to the underworld. So listen to this. This sounds like Venus retrograde to me. These demons who know no food, who know no drink, who eat no offerings, drink no libations, who accept no gifts, who enjoy no lovemaking, who have no sweet children to kiss. These demons, they tear the wife from the husband's arms, the child from the father's knees. They steal the bride from the marriage home. These demons clung to Inanna. Wow. Like it's because we think of Venus as like yummy stuff, fun, connection, relationship, lovemaking, the love we have for our children, children and families being together. And then we're seeing the separation of families in one way or another. So, I mean, all of these difficulties of Venus retrograde and the yummy things not turning out well, and relationships potentially having some challenges, separations being more in the front and center when Venus is challenged. Yeah, that's very real. And I just thought that that was fascinating that these demons are kind of the anti-Venus. So then there's this last kind of act of the story where these demons go around and they're going to pick someone to replace in the underworld with Venus or with Inanna. They first try to take Ninshibur. Inanna's like, no, I love Ninshibur, leave them alone. And then two more times they try to take someone, Inanna's two sons. So Shara and who was the other one? Lulal. And Inanna's like, no, those are my children. You can't take them. And now this is where they come up upon Dumuzi, who is Inanna's husband. Dumuzi, the husband of Inanna. Now, I guess what I should go back and say is that when the demons were coming upon Ninshibur and Inanna's two sons, they found Ninshibur and both of her sons mourning. They were doing all of the lamenting, the beating of drums, the wearing of the potato sack or whatever, all of this stuff they were doing. But then they come upon Dumuzi, who is not doing that. In Uruk, by the big apple tree, Dumuzi, the husband of Inanna, was dressed in his shining May garments, in those powerful garments. He sat on his magnificent throne and did not move. He wasn't doing the actions of mourning and grieving that the other people were doing. The demons then wanted to take him, and Inanna was like, "Yep, this is the one. Not mourning for me, not doing anything." Inanna fastened on Dumuzi the eye of death. And so Dumuzi was then taken down. Now, I'm not gonna, for the purposes of time, because it's not as important to the Venus retrograde story, I don't think. But then there's this whole thing about Dumuzi's outcome, and there's basically mercy taken upon him. And instead of sending him to the underworld forever, it's very similar to some other Greco-Roman myths where people are in the underworld for 6 months and or a god is down there for 6 months and then in the upper world for 6 months. So they kind of split off half of the year upper world, half of the year lower world. Dumuzi's hands and feet get turned into snakes. Like that's some bit of mercy instead of him just dying. And that's pretty much it. That's where it ends. And there's a lot of commentary too about the mercy given to Dumuzi, but I think we'll just leave it at that. So I wanted to share that with you in terms of the myth. So we see, wow, that was quite the story. I mean, this upper world goddess who, because of circumstance, has to go to the underworld. There's some complicated relational themes between her and her sister Erishkigal, there, which are preceded by complicated romantic themes between her and Gilgamesh, and lead to loss and heartache that is really signified and symbolized by Erishkigal. Um, as someone, not to bring myself into it too much, but trauma, trigger warning, trauma warning. Um, Working in medicine, you see families, losing family members, people losing family members often. That's just part of the job, especially being someone where it's like, I know people think, oh, pharmacist, what do you do? Don't you just put labels on stuff? We're actually the ones people see the most. It's like I'm seeing patients see me. Well, when I used to do that work, they used to see me every month. They'd see their doctor every 6 months. No offense. We need everyone. All to say, I would see this mourning and this just right there in my face for 13 years of just like this, all of the things that Erishkigal was crying about. It's like, yes, that is so real. And then that whole beautiful exchange of empathy and these mercies being given back and forth. So there's just so many relational themes just interwoven all through this myth. So there you have it. Lots of things from astrology that we can see that have come pretty directly from these myths, these very old myths that are like more than 2,000 years old. Oh, let's get me not on here. All right. So today, as I record this, it is February 22nd, and we are going to be talking about Venus's retrograde, and they are going to be starting that on March 1st. So it's not for a little bit. I'm just going to animate this. We can see Venus is eventually going to get to 10 degrees. They're going to station retrograde. And this is where I'm going to start giving you some dates. So Venus entered their pre-retrograde shadow on the 28th of January. So actually back on the 28th of January, we had Venus coming back to the point where they will eventually station direct. So we've got Venus, who is going to come back to 25 degrees of Pisces, and then going to have to retrace all of their steps again that they've already been on. So that's what that pre-post retrograde shadow is about. It's just the parts of the sign that planet is going to have to move over more than once. So that this whole story then starts to percolate at the end of January. So all of February, it's been us slowly more and more and more getting into whatever the Venus retrograde story is going to be about for us. Then on the 4th of February, Venus entered Aries. Again, on the 1st of March, Venus is going to be stationing retrograde. And then on the 13th of March, that's when Venus is going to start to disappear from the evening sky. So I say approximately because depending on your latitude, where you live on the globe, depending on your atmospheric conditions, your horizon, you're going to be able to see Venus a little longer or not so much. I like to use the convention of 15 degrees away from the sun. That's when Venus start around where planets begin to disappear from view in the evening or the morning. So again, depending on where you are, in the early evening, you will no longer be able to see Venus in the evening sky after around March 13th. And then they're going to be rising again in the morning sky on April 1st, approximately. Again, depending on where you live, what your conditions are, they're going to start to be visible around April 1st in the early morning sky right before the sun rises. So, in betwixt, on the 22nd of March, we're going to have Venus and the sun come together into a Cazimi. And that is going to be happening at, what is it? 2 degrees of Aries. Now, this is what I'm actually going to be focusing on the most for my rising sign horoscopes, because anytime a planet is retrograde and moving through the fires of the sun, I mean, one, they're being purified by those fires. So, Venus topics, beauty, romance, relationships, fairness, justice, art, beauty, yum yums, all of those things that are currently struggling, they're also being purified by the fires of the sun around March 22nd of 2025. And that is going to look like, a reset button for a lot of us in those areas of life. Now, Venus is also ruling Taurus and Libra. And so, like for this theoretical Libra rising, this is going to be a big deal because this is also a rebirth of them, just in general as a person. Or it could be of any of their first house things, which is mind, body, spirit, and general circumstances. It's your physical body, your appearance. It's also your internal soul, essence, self, whatever you consider that. And then their eighth house of complex finances, sharing, exchange of resources, end of life topics, that's also going through a rebirth. So it's not just love, beauty, art, justice. It's also, depending on your rising sign, Venus's rebirth is also going to be a rebirth for two buckets of life topics in your own life. So, rising sign horoscopes will cover it. It happens about once every 18 months. The Venus retrograde happens about every year and a half. So, every year and a half, we get a reset button, a rebirth on these same topics. So, this is nothing new. It's nothing totally, wild in terms of our experience in life, but it's a good time to, you know, dust things off, regroup, tie up loose ends so that you can have a good reset later. Maybe middle of April into May. Then we'll be a little bit more off and running with whatever these rebirths are. Of course, I know everyone is also being like, well, what about Mercury? Because they're also here and they're also retrograde. That means they're also doing their rebirth. And that I'm not covering today, but if you feel really comfortable with a lot of these topics already, if you're a bit more intermediate in your astrology, then you understand, planets being in the heart of the sun, then all of the exercises I'm doing today with Venus and the Venus ruled parts of the chart, you can also do with Mercury and the Mercury ruled parts of your chart. So there's really interesting that there's these two planets that are both going through the rebirth around the same place of the chart at around the same time. It's going to be fresh for a lot of us. I think once we get into May, like things are going to be feeling pretty different than they are now. Granted, of course, time always does that, but more different than usual. Now, other thing, planets moving through the sun, purified by the beams of the sun and the fires of the sun. Also, because they are retrograde, then this also means that a planet like Venus and Mercury, both of them, meeting the sun in a retrograde, that is also the restart for their whole cycle. And that's why I talk about this in terms of a rebirth. Venus's relationship with the sun and the way that Venus moves around the sun, that relationship is called a synodic cycle. And that is a cycle that is being restarted on the 22nd of March. So Venus stuff really gets a very, very strong restart there. This is compared to when Venus is direct and moving through the sun, which can also happen. That's the middle of that synodic cycle. That's the middle of Venus's journey in their regular relationship with the sun. Still that purification theme, still a bit of that burning off of what no longer is serving us in with those topics of life, but not as much of like the rebirth, renewal, restart, reset button. That's going to be a little bit stronger during the retrograde part, which again is what we're about to have. So I just wanted to call attention to that. Then on the 27th of March, Venus is going to re-enter Pisces, and they will be there until the 30th of April. So we'll have about a month of Venus in Pisces, pretty much all through April. Again, on the 1st of April, Venus is going to reappear in the morning sky. And then on the 12th of April, we are going to get Venus stationing direct. So at that point, Venus is still going to be very slow. It's going to take them a while to build up speed. I mean, I would say by, again, like mid-May, maybe things are feeling like with the with Libra and Taurus and Venus ruled parts of our life, like those things are moving along a little bit more, progressing a little bit more easily, quickly, with Venus being direct, but then also needing to pick up some speed. So just because a planet stations direct does not mean that everything gets resolved right away and we are up to our regular speed of doing things. It does take a little bit for that planet to build up that speed again and get to feeling more how it usually does. May 14th, Venus is they get back to 10 degrees at some point in this day. They get back to 10 degrees of Aries. And so they're back to that degree where they originally stationed retrograde on the 1st of March. And then at that point, we are at the post retrograde shadow end mark, and we can all move on with our lives. And then on June 5th, we get Venus moving in Taurus. And then Venus finally gets a break from all of this. So this is a big point in terms of the vibe shift on from the first half of the year of 2025 to the second half of the year of 2025. Largely has to do with the fact that Venus is hanging out in two parts of our chart for 6 months. That's pretty much that. So again, just to give these list of dates again, I've got on the 28th of January, Venus entering their pre-retrograde shadow. On the 4th of February, Venus entered Aries. They are going to be stationing retrograde on the 1st of March, disappearing on the 13th, having their Cazimi rebirth on the 22nd, re-entering Pisces on the 27th, reappearing in the morning sky on the 1st of April, stationing direct on the 12th of April, re-entering Aries on the 30th of April, and then on the 5th or the 14th of May, Venus will be leaving their post-retrograde time, and all of this stuff should be in the rear view. And then finally, vibe shift, June 5th, Venus finally gets into a new place. So there's a lot of other action between Venus, Neptune, Rahu, Saturn. That is all in the other video that I made. My last set of rising sign horoscopes about Venus in Pisces, Aries, that's where I really break down a lot of that stuff. So check out for those details. That's where that is. And I also have a much more robust discussion there with dignity as well and the condition of Venus in Pisces versus Venus in Aries. So I'm not going to get into that here, but definitely check it out in the other video if you're interested in that. Again, that's linked below. And I think the only other nutsy boltsy thing I need to discuss before getting into the rising sign horoscopes proper is just my treatment of retrograde. What do we do with this? What does it mean when Venus is retrograde exactly? We've heard this whole story about Inanna, basically like losing all of her powers, all of her Venusian powers, and being faced with all of like the worst non-Venus things, like a lack of fun, love, beauty, yum-yums. And then we see her going through this whole journey that really mimics, disappearing behind the beams of the sun and then reemerging in the sky, really mimicking that whole thing. So a retrograde, a planet struggles to do their stuff as they normally would. They are going to be doing things differently. And that may cause very exciting, innovative, cool outcomes. And that planet struggling or being forced to do things differently might have some outcomes of delay or challenge or something needing to be resolved. So doing things differently, difficulties, inconsistencies or a lack of consistency. So not retrograde yet, but just Venus struggling in Aries. A lack of consistency in the stocking of my favorite shampoo and conditioner in my local this is in my third house, by the way, in my local spaces. I cannot find my hair care needs. So yeah, I'm noticing inconsistencies that can come up. There can be reversals sometimes. There can be a realization like, oh, I used to see this way, and now I see it in this different way. Or, oh, these values that I used to have, I'm noticing that I don't value that as much anymore. Or this thing I didn't used to really understand why it was great. Now I kind of understand. So Venus going back and forth with what they value, what they appreciate, um, reversals happening with those things, changes happening with those things. We can see changes in relationship. Uh, doesn't mean that Venus retrograde has to mean that all the relationships are going to fall apart, but I think it is good practice to be extra tender, caring, careful when Venus is retrograde. Being extra thoughtful and considerate in our relationships is going to save us a lot of grief over the next couple months. I think those are the main keywords that I have. So, reading off a few just advice, pro tips, helpful things to get through the next 6 weeks. So, doing things differently in relationships, having different relationships, examining values, bringing life into alignment with what we value. That whole reconsideration process of a retrograde and that going back to the drawing board, being like, am I really recycling the way that I could be? Stuff like that. Doing art, beauty, fun, pleasure, joy in new ways, doing romance in new ways, trying new things in the bedroom. That's all very real. Topics returning from the past. Yeah, that's the one. That's the one that I was missing. So, retrogrades, things can come back from the past. Right now, there's the Mars retrograde, and we have the Deuterang, which I know it comes from the Astrology podcast. I can't remember who said it first, but I want to say it was Steph Kazimi. Was it them? If someone remembers, who coined the Deuterang? I don't remember exactly. But Venus retrograde, honestly, I think it's the same. Maybe less deuterang-ish, but more relationship-orang. Like any old, even like fun, like old friends that you used to hang out with more and now you don't, and they're calling you up. Any old relationship that's coming back around, and that doesn't just have to be the ex that you don't like. It can also be like someone that you would love to talk to again that you have not talked to in a long time. Um, Restructuring, adjustments, noticing where there's challenges, friction, hot spots in a relationship, and then doing what needs to be done to, uh, strengthen, repair, to move forward in those relationships. Uh, with the martial tone of some of this retrograde, I will say that there could be a sacred weeding out of certain relationships, or even a sacred internal weeding out of how we approach relationships. Like, oh, I'm not going to do this anymore in friendship or relationship. Um, that's all very possible. And sometimes that means cutting away of certain people, but I think that's the most extreme version. I think a lot of times we can also cut away certain behaviors, certain actions, act different, basically. That's a very real possibility. So, as we are looking for how this retrograde is coming out for us, also that note to be looking internally. Is it realizations? Is it stuff that's changing inside of me? And or are there things happening external to you as well? Um, and then, of course, anytime there's friction with like values, justice, which, I mean, if you're watching the news, we are at kind of a peak right now of a lot of just difficult relational stuff out there, for lack of better words. Uh, it can show us what's really important. It's really nice to be reminded of what we value in gentle, soft ways, like, oh wow, chocolate cake. I forgot how good it is. You're eating chocolate cake and you're like, wow, I forgot. We got to make some of this more often. I really value chocolate cake. Versus when it's like, I have not had a chocolate cake in 15 years because of these circumstances. And I am being shown how much I love chocolate cake, but through not having it or having it taken away or something like that. Um, you know, as a queer person, seeing certain things about queerness be erased from American government websites and stuff. It's like very much showing me, yep, I do value that. I knew that. That's not news. I know that I value visibility, but for marginalized groups, but like, yeah, I really do value it and I am angry. And that anger is showing me what I value. So I don't think that this Venus retrograde, even though like some of it's in Pisces, and I think those will be the more internal, less outwardly obvious things, with half of this retrograde happening in Aries, I think there's going to be some of these more like inflamed, I hate telling people how they're going to feel. Just because there's inflammation around you and other people does not mean that it has to get you. You do not have to get got by the irritation and the frustration. So, all to say, there could be some inflammation. It could be just around you. You don't have to sing along with that song. But then, too, if you're noticing it's just happening on the inside, inflammation, irritation, just like, man, I can't believe these people are doing what these people are doing. Um, like, we're in a fire sign. Action, taking actions to take care of yourself, like literally doing like physical movement if it's possible, or taking actions like of activism in certain cases. Activism for yourself, activism for others, action, agency. If there's a lot of frustration or anger about relationships, values, needs in those realms, in those Venusian realms not being met, uh, yeah, I think any irritation, one good way to deal with it is by exercising choice, agency, and action. And it can give us a little bit more sense of being in control of aligning our life with our values versus just steaming and stewing about it. Um, So I think that's my last point before getting to the rising sign horoscopes. Thank you for going on that journey with me. I just was really excited to share the myth after reading about it a little bit more deeply and just seeing all of these themes of Venus come through and then Venus retrograde and the pains that happen when Venus isn't working right. You know, uh, it's all right there in the myth and very much a goddess disappearing, a goddess going away for a little bit, having a rebirth, and knowing that that rebirth is really going to affect each of us specifically in certain areas of our life. So check out the rising sign horoscopes. Thanks again, everyone. And I'll see you on the other side. Aries rising. When Venus is retrograde, this is going to be happening in your first house of mind, body, spirit, and general circumstances, which I know is very vague, general circumstances, but it's kind of whatever's around you generally. More so, I see it come up as identity, themes about the self, the body, health, appearance, even wardrobe, the presentation of the self, and then those more immaterial, spiritual essence type bits of self, maybe in the roles that you take on or really identify with the first house. So with Venus there, I mean, in general, it's a nice time to remember what you like about yourself, what's cool, what's beautiful about yourself. It's a good time to hopefully be receiving gifts from others or treating yourself in some nice way. But with the Venus retrograde, there is going to be that element potentially of a difficulty with achieving certain beauty, love, romance type things during the next month and a half. So at the same time, it is a time of trying things in a different way, trying new things, experimenting. I would recommend keeping things open-ended until April 12th. This is where, there are astrologers who are much more experts in deciding when to do different things with their hair. This is where I would generally advise a little bit of caution, especially with Aries. They move so quick, but they also live, they live their lives, they do stuff. So have fun, keep things kind of light and loose, I would say, in March, first half of April. Now, the thing that really interests me, especially that I'm going to be talking about with each rising sign, is the Cazimi. So when the Sun and Venus are here together at the same degree, oh, and if I back them on up to your first house, this is that rebirth of Venus, a purification through the fires of the Sun, and it is the restart of their synodic cycle with the Sun. So at this point, not only is there maybe a rebirth of the self, a rebirth, a restarting, a rejuvenation of anything mind, body, spirit, it could also be a time of the seventh house and the second house having a rebirth. And so rebirths and renewals having to do with your money, your resources, any needs, and how those needs are met. All of that is a second house conversation. But, simply put, money and resources. In the seventh house, we have partners and partnerships. So maybe there's something that is percolating that is feeling new, or maybe like a reset button on something to do with resources and partners. It could be, I'm always looking for examples of things happening internally inside of me versus externally outside of me. So in this case, in the second house, this could be your approach to money is being renewed or reborn in some way, how you manage your finances, how you invest in yourself, how you manage your time, money, skills, effort, energy. All of that could be renewed. Hit the reset button on that. Maybe approaching things differently with Venus being retrograde. With partnerships, similarly, internal examples of, oh, maybe there's nothing happening externally with my partnerships per se, but my approach to them and what's going on inside of me in regards to how I relate to people, maybe that is what is getting this renewal or a rebirth. So look for those themes coming up over March and April, specifically between March 1st and April 12th. Good luck, Aries Rising. And then let's see what's going on with Taurus. So, Taurus Rising, this Venus activity is happening in your 11th and 12th houses. Again, refer to my last video on Venus being in Pisces and Aries in general for so long, in terms of a lot of the themes that are going to be coming up related to friends, groups, networks of people, as well as mental health, emotional health, spiritual health, related practices, 12th house topics. I'm very interested in how, over March and April, how we can hold these areas of life a little bit more lightly, be more open-ended, not try to have really solid expectations about how things with, say, friends are going to go, or a spiritual practice that you might be working on. Try to be experimental and just leave things open-ended till mid-April. And then once Venus stations direct on April 12th, then we might see things settle into more of a solid, firm shape in terms of those life topics that I just mentioned. So that's part one of Venus doing their retrograde journey. Also, we have to consider Venus doing their Cazimi on March 22nd, having their conjunction with the sun. And so if you're a Taurus rising, this Venus-Sun conjunction, this rebirth of Venus is happening in your 12th house, but it also is going to be affecting your first and your sixth houses. So this rebirth, and this could have to do with like some kind of renewal or rebirth with mental health, emotional health, or spiritual health, or related practices. It could be a rebirth, something new opening up in terms of how you navigate suffering, how you navigate alone time. It could be something new, a new cycle opening up in terms of if you do advocacy work, especially for people who are, it could be your own journey with being of a group that is marginalized or disenfranchised. And if it's not you personally, are you maybe helping other people who are in those marginalized, disenfranchised 12th housey type groups? This could be a rebirth in terms of some of that advocacy type of work. If you work in healthcare, this could be some type of new thing opening up in regards to that, or a rebirth in terms of health, wellness, in terms of your own health things, whether they're acute or chronic. There could be some kind of rebirth, renewal in terms of your journey with those things. Now, with the retrogradedness of Venus, trying different things, trying new things, taking a different approach, especially if it's something that is recurrent, has come back from the past, not to scare anyone at all. I wouldn't go looking for things. It's kind of like more like if it's a problem right now, like that's, if you don't have any problems right now, don't look for them. But there's a lot of people out there who have chronic health conditions, and that is a 12th house thing. So that's a long time journey for a lot of people. And so there's going to be a lot of points in that health journey where there's going to be, yeah, renewals, rejuvenations, restarts, resets, trying a new thing. Now, it also has to do with the first house of self, identity, mind, body, spirit. We can also tie health things in with that. So, I mean, gosh, and also if you were maybe starting a new exercise routine, having some realizations about what a new, beginning might be like, and then knowing that more once Venus stations direct, gets out of the beams of the sun, starts gaining speed in the direct direction, and that's going to be more end of April into May, then we'll see these topics of self, identity, appearance, wardrobe, whatever it is in the first, we'll see those settle into a shape. Likewise, at the end of April into May, topics of the sixth house that are having a rebirth. Pets, labor, health comes up again, advocacy work. If any of those things are coming up for you, they might settle into more of a shape more toward the end of April into May. So again, being experimental, open-ended with a lot of these topics. And again, look internally for examples within yourself where maybe you're just having realizations, understandings, like a change in how you approach things, and or examples of these things coming up externally in your life, around you, or in others in your life. So that's what I have for Taurus Rising. Best of luck with these rebirths. It's a good opportunity to hit the reset button on a lot of these topics. Now, let's see what's happening for Gemini risings. And again, check out my Venus and in Pisces and Aries video that I made last month to give a more general overview of what Venus might be up to in these areas of your life, and more your career, public life, your life paths, your friendships, groups, aspirations. That's where a lot of the life topics that are going to be activated during March and April. Lots of change, reorganization, renewals, and rebirths having to do with, again, career aspirations as well as your friends and groups. But it's also going to bring in some of these other Venus ruled topics. And so, especially Venus's joining with the sun in Cazimi, Venus being in the heart of the sun. This is that rebirth moment that we're having around March 22nd. And that is also going to be a rebirth for your 12th house of mental health, emotional health, and spiritual health and related practices. So a rebirth, a renewal with those. And with 5th house children, rest, fun, creativity, romance, sex, good times, gifts, a renewal, a rebirth in those areas of life. So at this point, around end of March, just try to notice, see if there's anything that's feeling like it's getting a rejuvenation. You're hitting a reset button on some of these areas of life. And then as Venus stations direct, starts to pick up speed in the other direction, becomes visible more at the end of April into May, then we're going to see a lot of these areas of life, career, friends, groups, also mental health, emotional health, spiritual health, children, fun, rest, romance, creativity. All of those things are going to start to settle into more of a shape end of April into May. The idea, I think, in March and April is to keep a lot of these areas of life as open-ended as possible, try different things, experiment, understand if there are things coming back from the past, whether it's a friend or someone you haven't seen in a while that's just coming back around to say hey and catch up. That could also be something to notice and just enjoy while it's here. That's actually kind of a fun thing for both Gemini risings and Taurus risings. Some of this stuff touches your 11th house of friends and groups. And I do find that during retrogrades, a lot of what's happening is people coming back from my past that want to like hang out. So it's actually kind of fun. So not anything to worry about necessarily. Also knowing that the 12th house is getting a rebirth here for Gemini risings. The 12th can be about chronic health conditions, also just long-standing challenges. And I find that when people have these longer journeys through challenging landscapes for, again, just a very long period of time, there's going to be different points in there where, at least I hope, there's moments of renewal, moments of rebirth, moments of resetting and approaching that challenge in a new way, or kind of reaching the next level with it or something in hopefully more of a progressive way. Again, more of that, seeing that progress more end of April into May. But notice in terms of chronic health challenges or long-standing health challenges that there is an opportunity here to hit the reset button on some things. So that's going on. And then also, if you are someone who works in advocacy, healthcare, in any kind of profession where you're helping people, or if you yourself have experienced marginalization, exclusion, loneliness, suffering, um, any of those types of experiences, whether it's happening to you and or you're witnessing it around you, this is also something that in some way there's an opportunity here to hit a reset button on it, to take a different approach, to try things differently. Um, so letting March and April be that for us and show what different possibilities we might have in approaching some of those areas where you might be trying to help or just navigate that kind of difficulty, because it is the 12th can be a place of struggle. Uh, Even if it's just like how to navigate loneliness, and trying things with friends and groups in a different way. That could be what's going on in March and April. So I just want to call out some of those more difficult themes of the 12th. Uh, it's a spiritual place. I mean, again, for I think a lot of people, when the 12th is activated by things, it does come out in not only these challenges, but all the practices that we do to manage them. And just like a physical exercise routine for that type of health. There's plenty of spiritual, emotional, mental health practices that can be really supportive that also need that kind of routine and maintenance. And sometimes we got to hit the reset button on that and try again. So good luck, Gemini Rising. That's what I have for you. Rebirths, renewals. Keep things light and open-ended for Gemini, for everyone. Keep things light and open-ended as much as possible until end of April. Then things are going to settle into a shape. But if we try to push that river, if we try to push that too quickly, it'll just create more work than we need to do, I think. One more thing for Gemini Rising is that if your IC falls into the whole sign fifth house, like here it's in the third, but if you have it in the fifth, then some of these Venus renewal rebirths could have to do with your home, your private life, your parents, renewals or rebirths with ancestry topics, or with your relationship to the land. So wanted to add that in. Let's look at Cancer Rising. So a lot of this activity is happening for you in your ninth and your 10th houses. And so definitely check out the video that I made last month, the rising sign horoscopes that were just discussing more generally Venus's time in Pisces and Aries. And so, of course, a lot of this renewal and rebirth energy is happening around your places of career, public life, mass communication, long distance travel, faraway places, beliefs, worldviews, upper, higher, continuing education, rebirths, renewals around all of those topics potentially. Trying things differently with those areas, things or people coming back from those areas. So like if you have particularly like after high school, but like old friends from college or something. Yeah, this is like like for Cancer Risings, this is the time where they'll probably come back. Or people from your past in your profession who are like ringing you up for some reason. That can definitely happen when we got retrograde planets. It can be just people coming back around from the past to catch up in from these areas of our lives. Or like even traveling to a place you've traveled before. That would be a very retrograde in the ninth, around the ninth activity to do. And it's also amongst those retrograde themes of trying things differently, inconsistency, challenge, etc. with retrogrades, there's also these themes of rebirth and rejuvenation, and they're also happening with your 11th house of friends groups, hopes, dreams, aspirations, and also your place of home, parents, parent relationships, ancestors, rebirths, renewals with your living spaces, your living situation, with your private life. So, looking around like end of March, what things feel like, okay, it's time to hit a reset button, or just naturally things feel like they're being renewed, rejuvenated in some kind of way, that there's like this purification and rebirth of these topics, even just internally approaching those areas of life differently, trying new things in terms of friends or groups, trying new things in terms of what you're hoping for, aspiring toward, trying new things with your home, parents, private life. All of that is great stuff to do in March into April. And then know that these areas of life are going to settle into more of a defined shape at the end of April into May, and things will start to take more of a form. If we try to cling to some idea or expectation about how things are going to go when we're still in March and early April, I think we're just going to make more work for ourselves. So, holding these topics of like friendship, home, career, public life, private life, holding them in a more experimental way, in a more open ended way, all of March, first half of April, that's going to be better. So hold it lightly. It'll take more of a shape in a couple months. That's what I have for you, dear Cancer Rising. Good luck. And let's see what's going on with Leo. Leo Rising. A lot of this activity has been in your eighth and your ninth houses. So definitely go check out my last video for rising signs about Venus and Pisces and Aries. I cover a lot about, what their influence might be in these areas of life. And what I want to focus on today is, of course, the rebirth renewal that is happening when Venus and the Sun join on March 22nd. And so, of course, renewals, rebirths with how you approach the ninth house, the eighth house, the places of belief. So you might have renewals, rebirths related to belief, worldview, long distance travel, faraway places, continuing or advanced education. Maybe there's something that is being reborn in those areas. Wait until end of April into May to see how that all shakes out. Also, with the eighth house of sharing resources, exchange with others, anything with other people's stuff and how you share your stuff with other people, all of that exchange happens in the eighth house. So, this might be a journey in renegotiating, whether that's how you approach sharing of resources or literally externally, like reorganizing how you're sharing resources, including not only just your money, but your time, your energy, your skills, your talents. Really reconsidering like what you're sharing with who. That could be something that it's good to just be experimental with, be open ended with in all of March into April. And then again, with those exchanges of resources, any of those agreements with people, waiting until end of April into May for those things to shake out into more of a defined shape. And then also knowing that in this rebirth of Venus, something about the career and life path is reborn, or there's an opportunity to hit a reset button here with career and life path, as well as the third house of communication, foundational learning, primary education, communities, neighborhoods, anything nearby familiar people, places, things. Now, familiar sometimes is geographically near, like local. Sometimes familiar is online. So, third house, if anything feels like it's being reborn or has an opportunity to have just a fresh start, that would be a really great way to approach those topics in March and April. And then again, with communities, communication, primary education, all of those topics. Oh, siblings, cousins, extended relatives, aunts, uncles, in-laws. If there's rebirths with those people, that would be a March and April thing. Mobility and short distance travel, rebirths or renewals with those topics. So anything like that coming up for Leo rising, that would not be surprising in March and April. Again, holding those things as lightly as possible, keep things open-ended, be experimental, and know that we'll feel a little bit more certain about how those topics are going to go more at the end of April into May. For Libra rising, another thing to note is if your IC falls in the whole sign third house, like this person here, if you have a birth chart that looks like this, that means that the rebirths and renewals of Venus could also have to do with your home, your dwelling, your living situation, your parents, your ancestry, or rebirths, renewals with your relationship with the land. So any kind of rebirth renewal, I mean, it could be rearranging your furniture. It could be, doing a genealogy search, uh, anything that feels like a fresh start or a reset button. With those things, that would also make sense for Leo rising. So, rebirth renewal with third house. But if your IC is also in the third, then rebirth and renewal with fourth house topics as well. So, I just want to make that clear if that was the case in anyone's birth charts. Good luck, Leo rising. So, Virgo, this is happening for you in your eighth and seventh houses, this Venus retrograde. So be sure to go to my last video, last month's rising sign horoscopes. I go over Venus's time in Aries and Pisces a little bit more thoroughly. Here I want to focus not just on the doing things differently with beauty, love, relationship with others, how you share yourself with others, but there's also these rebirths and these renewals potentially with topics of how you're sharing your resources with others. Are your relationships feeling fair, reciprocal, sustainable when it comes to give and take? And there's a moment at the end of March to really start anew, if you would like, have a rebirth, have a renewal of those types of agreements with people. Uh, when it comes to partnerships and the sharing that goes on with them, this could also be some kind of rebirth in terms of how you approach that just internally. Sometimes there can just be internal realizations. Sometimes it can be actual external changes and conversations and things happening. So I usually try to look for both representations. But this is really affecting the seventh house of partnerships, the eighth house of shared resources. The eighth house is also a place of end of life topics, whether that's death physically or the financial, legal, logistical things around end of life, the spiritual things around end of life. This could be some kind of rebirth renewal in terms of your beliefs around those things, how you approach those end of life topics and preparing for that. This is a time to hit the reset button there as well. And that is a bit related to the places that Venus rules, being for you, dear Virgo rising, it is Libra, your second house, and Taurus in your ninth. So these areas of money, resources, whether it's your money, your energy, your time, that there's a rebirth going on with. There is a chance to hit a reset button with resources, money, time, anything that's yours. Also, your needs and how they're met. This could be a time, a rebirth for that, for those topics and how you approach that. Also, the ninth house, I'd mentioned world view or belief. Particularly here, it's really getting into potentially like sharing and death. uh, but in general, there could just be any kind of view or worldview or belief or philosophy that's getting a rebirth, or where there's a rebirth moment in there. Where maybe you're having realizations just in general about how you see the world. That could be what's going on in March. Hold that stuff lightly if you've got a new worldview coming in, or you're tweaking or making reconsiderations or adjustments to your existing worldviews. Let that be like a very fruitful experimental open process all of March into April. And then end of April into May, I think we're going to start to see those things settle down, take more of a form, feel more certain and secure. Same thing goes with long distance travel. If you're doing any long distance travel in March and April, it's okay. Just leave early for the airport, double check all your documents and stuff. Not in a paranoid way, but just in like a discerning, you're doing your due diligence kind of way. Kind of, it's like retrograde antidote, look at things twice. I have plenty of people who do travel. Uh, who have to do financial things during retrogrades. And, sometimes it just ends up being like, oh, the fax won't send the fax to the place and I have to try it 3 times. Or I forgot this document and I got to go circle back around and get this document. So sometimes it's just these little things. Don't let it freak you out too much. But all to say, March and April, being flexible, adaptable, open-ended, and light, holding with worldviews, beliefs, long distance travel. Also, mass communications, publishing. This is where you want to also double check for typos, things like that, and know that they're probably going to happen. It's not, it's all right. You know, as long as there's a big difference between high impact typos and low impact typos. High impact typos to me are like when the decimal place is off with the pharmacist math. That's a high impact typo. A low impact typo would be like you did an advertisement and a word is spelled wrong. Like people still get the message. It's more of just like a hit to the ego and the pride. And I mean, maybe you'll lose a few customers, but they were critical anyway. So don't worry about it. You can mass communicate. You can go on, Blue Sky or whatever and, tweet to your heart's delight. Um, just be flexible, adaptable, changeable, and know in March and April you might run into some little hiccups. And then also with money, rebirths, renewals, again, whether it's how you approach your money, spreadsheets that you use or not, it can be as boring as that, or it can be much more interesting rebirths in terms of finances or resources. For Virgo risings, one good thing to note as well is if your midheaven is in Taurus in the ninth whole sign house, that means that the renewals and rebirths of Venus are going to affect potentially your career, your life path, your public life. So, kind of just as a note on the side, that's already going on in terms of Mercury, who is also doing their move through the heart of the sun, being reborn through the flames of the sun. So we're getting, if you, especially if you have your midheaven also in Taurus in the ninth, then there's 2 pieces of testimony happening at the same time that speak to some rebirth or renewal having to do with career or life paths or public life. So another thing to note, I just wanted to clarify that in case anyone has their midheaven in that whole sign ninth house. So that's what I have for you, Virgo rising. Good luck. All right, Libra rising. This is happening for you in your seventh house of partners, including marriage partners, business partners, best friends, one on one clients, all of those really important one on one people. That's seventh house. And so there's potentially some renewals or rebirths happening there in March and April. I would say, being you are Venus, you yourself may be going through some kind of rebirth or renewal and how you just, show up to relationship, how you approach it from the inside. It could be very literal, external, like new beginnings or something like that with partners. But this is an opportunity to hit the reset button. So if any partnerships need a different approach, trying things differently, having a reset, this is a good time at the end of March to do that. And then know that some of those relationships, let things be open-ended, experimental throughout March into April, and then know that we'll have probably more clarity on the matter at the end of April into May. Even just like how you might want to carry yourself or how you assert yourself or advocate for yourself, try different things out with that in March and April, and then you might be feeling more sure-footed and confident with that advocacy for the self in relationship more end of April into May. This is a potential rebirth renewal in terms of your eighth house as well, which is a place of sharing of resources, other people's resources, end of life topics, whether it's death physically, literally, or the finances, logistics around it, or the spiritual components around death. So if there's anything here in terms of rebirths or renewals around end of life topics, partners and end of life topics. I mean, again, like a boring example would be that you do your advanced directives together and you actually hand them into your physician. And that's a new start. Like, okay, we're more prepared if the worst happens, or some kind of rebirth or renewal in how you are estate management and planning with yourself or a loved one. So that there's a nice reset button opportunity with those things if those things need a little freshening up or enlivening. And then eighth house is all of those types of agreements we have with people around sharing of time, energy, talent, skills, money. So this is an opportunity for a reset button, a renewal, a rebirth around how you share yourself with others, how others share with you. Look into those areas of life, see if there's any unsustainability, lack of fairness, lack of reciprocity. And the end of March could be a really good time to renegotiate those things and have an experimental period around that and a trying it out phase. And then knowing that it might be much clearer, easier to understand how to share and what to share and with who and how much at the end of April, more into May. But this might be kind of an outstanding ongoing process. Like the rebirth is a process that it begins, things seed, this is a seeding moment on the 22nd, but things don't really get rolling until Venus stations direct, starts moving in the other direction. And again, that's not until end of April into May. But looking, again, end of March, what is wanting to be reborn or refreshed or reset or rejuvenated around self, other, and how that sharing is going on? That's what I would look for and try to notice. So good luck, Libra rising. Oh, and one more thing though for Libra rising. When it comes to your first house, this is mind, body, spirit. It is the physical self. It's also the intangible essence of self, or however you conceptualize that. In the physical realm, that can be resets with health, resets or rebirths with your appearance or wardrobe, anything like that. There can be a bit of a reset button there happening in March for you for those things. So keep it experimental, keep it open-ended. A lot of people have astrological opinions about when to cut your hair or not, or when to like do a drastic, thing like get a tattoo or not. Again, I think it really depends on your birth chart. Like if you have a Venus retrograde in your birth chart, then doing big moves like that makes a lot of sense and it generally works out pretty well because Venus retrograde is basically when they are retrograde and in transit, they're jiving and aligning with what you're used to in your birth chart. If you have Venus retrograde in there in your birth chart. So then if the weather is the kind of weather that you are acclimated to, then that might be the perfect time to come back to the self and make those kind of bigger moves or really download those understandings about the self much more easily than at other times. So look out for that if you have Venus retrograde in your birth chart. It might be a pretty fruitful time to not actually hesitate. Like you guys, you got a green light. Okay. But for the rest of us, be a little bit more careful. Keep things open-ended until end of April into May. Let's see. All right, keep things open-ended till mid-April, till Venus stations direct. Okay, that's what I have to say for Libra. Good luck. And then we have Scorpio Rising. This is happening in your sixth house and fifth house. Venus is going to be hanging out in Aries and Pisces. So check out my last video, Last Rising Signs for the month of February. And I went over how Venus might be affecting your sixth and fifth houses. And that'll give you some details there. So beyond the regular retrograde, doing things differently, delays, working through challenges, keeping things kind of open-ended with these areas of life. So for you, health, labor, pets, romance, fun, creativity, rest, children. Those are areas where you might be doing things differently, having kerfuffles, having hiccups, working through them, people, places, things coming back from the past, for better or for worse. All that's going on. We also are having a rebirth of Venus through the heart of the sun. And so there might be this energy around the end of March of rebirth, renewal, a reset button for your sixth house of health, labor, and pets. And also advocacy work. If you're doing anything for advocacy or for service, this is also an area that is relevant. New things opening up or regroupings. Again, the reset button is my favorite phrase because a lot of things last longer than 18 months. You know, a lot of health journeys last a lot longer than 18 months. And each time there's this renewal of, well, especially for your 12th house and your 7th house. Each time there's a renewal here, it's an opportunity to approach those things a new way, try things differently, and have breakthroughs and tie up any kind of tangles or untangle any tangles that need untangling. So that's going on in March and April is this rebirth renewal with sixth house of health, labor, pets, but then also the other Venus ruled areas of life. So for Scorpio risings, end of March, there's a rebirth or a renewal for your partnerships, for business partners, marriage partners, best friends, or one on one clients. So there could be an opportunity for a refreshing, a renewal of how you approach partnerships. Or it could be that something's opening up in terms of new partnerships or new clients. The 12th house is where I place topics of spiritual, mental, and emotional health and all of the practices that help us to navigate those things. The 12th is a place of chronic health challenges or just long-standing challenges of any kind. It is a place of loneliness, marginalization, disenfranchisement. It's not the happiest place in the world. Uh, my sun is in there and my Mercury and some other stuff. So I'm here, I'm alive, but I wouldn't recommend it, you know. But these things as well need refreshes and resets. And so if you've got any mental health, emotional health, spiritual health practices you use to navigate suffering of being alive, this is a great time in March to try different things. Hit the reset button. Those things can be reborn. Um, I think the 12th can be hidden and mysterious things. I don't know how that works with the resetting of those things. If you're someone who's trying to sort through anything hidden or mysterious, this could be a time of taking a new approach, trying again in a new way. That could be what's going on there. Any kind of behind the scenes work that you're doing. This can sometimes just be a place where people make moves in silence. What is being born or seeded in March? That could be something that you're just going to be doing behind the scenes a little bit more for the next 18 months. 12th house can be a place of complicated relationships, frenemies, or hidden enemies. It's hard to know where they are because they're hidden, but make sure around March, I don't want to make anyone paranoid, but I would try to not seed any conflicts or battles that may last a long time unintentionally. Sometimes we take up battles and we must, and it's a matter of just doing the right thing. If there are any conflicts that are brewing in March for you, dear Scorpio rising, tread as carefully as you can for your own sustainability and safety. I don't want anything seeded here that could be icky. That's kind of one of the more ominous ones I've given, actually. But if anyone can handle it, it's Scorpio rising. I think a lot of times too, rebirths, renewals with these energies of suffering or conflict, it can be a rebirth in how we approach those topics. So, for instance, I'm so resistant to conflict. Conflict is not a fun thing for me. I have a Scorpio Mars, and I don't know, just because I have a powerful Mars, apparently that does not translate, given the rest of my chart, to me being skilled in conflict. However, because of that difficulty, I have found a number of tools over the years that have helped me to navigate conflict with other people. And I've had many moments of rebirth and renewal in how I handle conflict, where I will find this cool new thing and it'll blow my mind and I'll be like, oh, this is a whole new ball game. in terms of whatever struggle or conflict or discomfort this is. Or with health challenges, same thing. It's like if you are dealing with anything, again, don't go looking for stuff. If you don't have something that you can quickly say, oh yeah, I have an injury or I have this thing, don't go looking for it. But if you are currently dealing with any health challenges, yeah, hitting the refresh or the reset button is necessary sometimes, saying, okay, I am going to put the past behind me in terms of all the BS you probably dealt with. And I am going to take this new approach, whether that's self care and how you go about this journey or more external activities. Uh, yeah, so renewals and rebirths can be just very, very helpful, even in these difficult places of the 6th and the 12th. And yeah, if you're helping anyone else through struggles or challenges right now, because this is also kind of bringing in topics of partners. This could be other people having the struggles, and you're more there as a support. This could be some kind of rebirth or renewal and how that goes on in your life as well. Okay, dear Scorpio rising, good luck. And let's check on Sagittarius rising. So we have a lot of this activity happening in your 4th and 5th houses of Pisces and Aries. Check out my last video, Rising Sign Horoscopes for Venus and Pisces and Aries, where I go through more of Venus's general effects in these areas the first half of the year. But I wanted to focus a little bit more today on the rebirth and renewal aspect of Venus and the Sun here. And there may be around the end of March a rebirth renewal, especially around March 22nd. It's in your 5th house of creativity, rest, fun, sex, romance, self expression. All of that is 5th house. So, rebirths, renewals, reset buttons with anything to do with your love life, how you raise your kids, your creativity, anything like that, or how you rest or have fun. Reset button on those topics going on in March. Also in the 4th house, there's some activity here involved in, like, maybe it's involving the ways that you bring those topics of children, rest, fun, pleasure into your private life. And how does your home support those things? How does your living space or living situation support those parts of your life? And any kind of reorganization of these areas, doing things differently, experimenting, trying new things, that is all very appropriate for March and April. Um, Not only are there going to be rebirth, renewal vibes happening with love, children, rest, fun, but also your 6th house and your 11th house are going to be getting a dose of this rebirth, renewal energy. And so, March 22nd, end of March, be looking for anything that feels like a renewal or a rebirth with friends or groups, or with your hopes or aspirations, what you're working toward. Maybe you're finding new things, new friends, new groups, and something's opening up. Or maybe it is just like existing aspirations, existing friends and groups, and something new opening up there, or some kind of refresh button, either internally approaching those areas of life differently than you have before, or external things happening that are speaking to some kind of renewal. Then we also have your 6th house being reborn in a lot of ways at the end of March. So, health, labor, pets are the main topics of the 6th. Your upkeep of your health, your daily chores, the bill paying work that you do, punching into the office, any pets that you have or animals, all of that is very 6th housey. And all of that has a chance for a rebirth, a renewal, a reset button around health or health matters, whether they are more acute or longer term. I think especially when health matters end up being a little bit more long term, a reset button can help. A reset button or a refreshing, or I'm going to approach this differently from a different angle, that can be very useful. When it comes to the 6th, we can also see themes of conflict, service, sacrifice. And so any kind of resets or renewals in how you approach or what you're doing in terms of activism or service work, that could be really relevant here, especially if you're doing it in a group. There could be some kind of renewal there or rebirth. And then even in terms of how you approach conflict, There might be a rebirth or a renewal there. One last thing for Sagittarius risings, if you have your midheaven in Libra in the 11th whole sign house, that means that those rebirths and renewals of Venus might also affect your career and your life path or your public life. So, rebirths or renewals with anything to do with those topics. We are also seeing that with Mercury, who is going to be moving through the heart of the sun, being purified and reborn through those flames. So, we've got a couple things, especially if you're someone who, again, has the midheaven in that whole sign 11th house. That means that there's two things both saying that there could be a renewal or a rebirth with career, life path, or public life. So, one other good thing to consider, I wanted to clarify that in case anyone has a Libra midheaven in the whole sign 11th. So, good luck, Sagittarius rising. That's what I have for you. I hope you can find some good spaces to do a nice reset button. All right, Capricorn rising. Definitely go check out my last rising sign horoscope where I talk all about Venus's effects on your third and fourth houses. I go into a lot of detail about how they might be affecting those areas in the first half of 2025. What I want to focus on today a little bit more is the Venus Sun Cazimi, Venus going into the heart of the sun, being purified by the flames and the fire, and being reborn into her next 18-month cycle. And so I'm looking at what rebirths and renewals are happening in your private life, in your home, in your parent relationships, with ancestry. What is being reborn or renewed in your relationship with the land, whether that's gardening or something more? What is being rebirthed there? When it comes to third house matters as well. There's a little bit of reorganization, doing things differently, experimenting with third house, local, familiar people, places, things, with neighbors, communication, doing things differently, with learning new things. All of that is March and April, very appropriate activities. So as these things are being experimented with, as we're seeing some rebirths, renewals in the home, private, parent part of our chart, we can also look at these as opportunities for a reset button. So if you're like, I don't see anything that like wants to be reborn, like my furniture is not going to rearrange itself, but maybe that could be another good fourth house Venus Cazimi thing to do. But what I think it can be is an opportunity to say, okay, my living room could use a reset. There could be a reset button that would feel really good. Or with your living situation, maybe you're looking to get out of a living situation. Maybe now is the time to start looking in the end of March. So starting that new cycle, approaching these areas of life differently, that is all really great to do. Now, also areas that might be reborn or renewed, March and April. We have the fifth house of children or parenting if you have children, romance, sex, fun, creativity, self-expression, and rest. I like to put rest in the fifth because it's like anything in the fifth that rejuvenates us, that fills our cup, and then once our cup overflows, we can self-express and create and be this generative force of life. Like that's very fifth house to me. So with children, fun, creativity, rest, sex, reset button, renewal, rebirth, if you want. 10th house of career, public life, life paths, resets, rebirths, renewals with that as well in March. Now, a lot of this stuff, keep it open-ended, be experimental. Don't hold too tightly to any expectations around any of these areas of life I've mentioned. I know there's been like 50 now, but that's better than 200. So all of these things, leave them open-ended until mid-April. And then I expect more end of April into May, we're going to see a lot of these areas of life settle into an updated, refined shape. So do your best with being as open-ended and light as you can and experimental in March and April, and then let things take their form And again, that is to do with your third house, your fourth house, your fifth house, and your 10th house. All of those life topics are going through this refining process in March and April. So, best of luck, Capricorn Rising. All right, Aquarius Risings. A lot of the Venus activity has been in your second house of money and resources, and your third house of the third house is a lot of things. I'll get to it in a second. But go to my last rising sign video that I posted where I go through Venus's effect on these two houses, these buckets of life topics. They're going to be affecting, Venus is going to be affecting these areas of life for the first 6 months of 2025. I go into it more in that video. Now, the third house, where Venus is having an effect, is a place of your local or familiar people, places, things. So that a lot of times is neighbors, cousins, aunts, uncles, extended relatives, siblings, chosen family, people you see around the neighborhood, your neighbors, people in your community, communication, foundational education. Also, divination in some ways, short distance travel, and mobility. So, those are some of our third house topics. And those are going to be going through this refinement process over March and April. Now, not only are we going to be like hopefully keeping things open ended, experimental, holding things lightly in March and April, but we're also going to have an opportunity for renewal, for a reset with especially these third house topics, but also the ninth and the fourth house. So Venus is going to be moving through the heart of the sun, and in that transit through the flames of the sun, she is purified by the fires, she is reborn, and she gets ready for her next 18-month cycle. And so this is a renewal and a rebirth and a seeding moment for Venus and Sun. And we have Venus, who is ruling over the ninth house and the fourth house, also bringing those topics in for renewal and rebirth. And so with third house communication, short distance travel, local spaces, familiar people, etc., not only that, going through some kind of rebirth, renewal, but also your fourth house of home, family, your private life, parents, ancestors, rebirths, renewals with your living situation, your living space, renewals with your relationship with the land in whatever shape that comes. So, an opportunity to hit a reset button, whether it is dusting your apartment, rearranging your furniture, doing some kind of genealogy research, any kind of restart button, go for it. Also, with your ninth house of mass communication. So, if you're a blogger or you publish, there's could be some kind of restart or rebirth with those topics. Also, travel, long distance travel, resetting with that. Worldview and belief. These are other things that may go through a renewal or a rebirth at this time in March. And so I would recommend with all of these topics that I've mentioned, whether it's the familiar people, places, things, the home and living situation, the beliefs, in March and April, try new things, be open to new things, experiment. Don't hold too tightly to any one way or thinking it's going to turn out in some certain way until like more mid-April. Then I think things are going to take more of a final shape. But I think things are going to be very mutable and changeable and open-ended in March and early April. So with worldview, try not to settle on anything too strongly or intensely like around end of March. I think there's still more to the story, more realizations that are going to come in early April. When it comes to any kind of, if you're going through any passport or visa things or bureaucratic kind of, those types of ninth house things. If that's going on right now, that might be a story that takes a minute. Hopefully it's fine for you, but if there's any delays or difficulties with getting those documents figured out or sorted out or back to you, I have much more hope for you. Like, I mean, after March 22nd, after that Cazimi, because then Venus is going to be on her way out of the beams, like going in that direction. But then, especially like after April 1st, then Venus is going to become visible. And then likewise, I think ninth house things are going to be more easily engaged with. So Could be a longer story there. Hang in there. I think it'll be better in April. And then, of course, Venus stationing direct on the 12th of April. That will also move these themes along a little bit more firmly, securely, progressively. In March and April, ninth house things might feel a little bit more unsteady. Ninth house is long distance travel. This doesn't mean you can't go on a long distance trip. If you have something scheduled between March 1st and April 12th that involves an airplane, I mean, hopefully you're not in America. Uh, Basically, if you're in any other country, you're probably going to be fine. If you're in America, be careful. No, I'm being a little facetious. I shouldn't be that way. Uh, but yeah, be careful. Leave for the airport early. Okay. Don't do the last minute run to the coffee line, like right before the plane boards. Like, don't do that stuff during a retrograde. Now, if you have a retrograde Venus in your birth chart, none of this applies to you. You're fine. You get green flags. You get, I'm not worried about you. But if you're like me and you don't have Venus retrograde, these can be tougher times for ninth house travel. Anything that, in my mind, ninth house travel is anything where you need an overnight bag. So it can be also by wheel. It doesn't have to be by air. Ninth house is government, church, state. So, also religion falls into here when I was talking about beliefs, worldview. Also, just to be explicit, religion falls in here. So, if there's any kind of contemplation about belief or religious stuff in March and April, that's natural. Let that process unfold, and you'll probably be feeling a little bit more clear on those thoughts that you might be reconsidering more at the end of April into May. Um, I think that's all I have for Aquarius Rising. Good luck. Best of luck. And I guess, oh, there is one more thing. For Aquarius Rising, if you have your midheaven in the ninth house, then this could also be a rebirth or a renewal for your career or your life paths. And then finally, ever patient Pisces Rising. We have the power of timestamps. Thank God. Hopefully you didn't have to wait. So we have Pisces rising, which means that a lot of this activity has been happening in your first and second houses. Definitely go check out my last video, rising signs, for just Venus generally moving through these two areas of your chart and what that's going to look like in the first half of 2025. So there's going to be doing things differently with self, mind, body, spirit, trying new things. That health note, that physical self note of the first, where there might be some experiments happening, that can be with wardrobe, appearance. It can be really small, more benign things. It can also be more like, I don't know, introspective ideas on identity or roles that you carry that you identify with. All of that, there might be this refining process happening in March and April. So allow that to be open-ended, that concept of self, if there's new things coming in or reconsiderations, let that be just a natural process that unfolds over March and April. And then I think we'll all be feeling a bit more clear at end of April into May on some of those topics. Also, same thing with your money, your resources, whether that's your money, your time, your energy, your skills. If that's going through a refinement process in March and April, let that happen. Trying things differently, being experimental, open-ended as much as you can. If you are noticing a rebirth, that could also be the case. So with Venus moving through those purifying flames in the heart of the sun, they're going to come out on the other side reborn. And so maybe too, your financial spreadsheets reborn, your approach to finances, your approach to resources for yourself. It could be advocating for your needs. The second house is our needs, and it can describe how we go about getting them met. And with Venus going through the heart of the sun here, it could be a time to restart, refresh, renew how we approach advocating for ourselves, getting our needs met. Hit the reset button on it. We can also see resets, renewals, rebirths in terms of the other Venus ruled areas here of Libra and Taurus. And so for all the Pisces risings out there, There can also be a reset here that has to do with not only your resources, but how you're sharing them with others, how others are sharing with you. And so, not to make anyone paranoid, don't look for problems if they're not there. But if there's any issues with reciprocity, lack of fairness, I think, well, on a collective scale, if I'm getting political for a second, in America at least, there's a lot of places in the world where there's a lot of unfairness and lack of justice. And the eighth house does have to do with a lot of those collective resources like insurance or any type of mutual aid can be very eighth housey. So looking at that kind of resource exchange in life and how's that looking? Does it feel fair? Does it feel sustainable? Is there any renegotiations or adjustments that could happen in March and April that would leave these areas feeling a bit better in May? Eighth house can also be end of life topics, death, very, literally, but also spiritually, financially, logistically. There's a lot of topics around end of life, preparation, experience, management. This is a time of rebirth and renewal, ironically, for the eighth house of death. So this can be a renewal or a rebirth in how you approach those topics. Maybe you're approaching them differently. Maybe for the first time, maybe for the second time in a new way. Maybe you're having some realizations and how you would like to imbue those preparations for end of life with your values and make it really fit to how you want to go out, like advanced directives or estate management and planning, all of those fancy words to say dealing with death. So letting that be reborn, letting us hit the reset button on that. And then eighth house, I mean, occult and esoteric things insofar as it is the hidden and mysterious 12th house from the ninth house. So if you're having a reset, a renewal, a rebirth of interest in occult or esoteric topics, or something is being seeded there, I think it'll be more obvious how those topics are going to flesh out for you in end of April into May. Now, third house, last thing, rebirths, renewals, maybe also relating to the third house of siblings, cousins, in-laws, aunts, uncles, all those people. Also neighbors, maybe rebirths, renewals with community, with local space that you're in. This could be a renewal or a rebirth around short distance travel or mobility. This could also have to do with primary or foundational education. So if there's any kind of renewals or rebirths or like hitting the reset button on any of those topics. This is also a place of divination. So any kind of embodiment of your belief or divination practice, that can be very, very third house, also ninth house. But certainly a rebirth, a renewal of any kind of embodiment. So like if you go to a temple or a church or you do I do like my magical oils that I put on at the right times of day, all of that is very third housey. So if you need a refresh on some of those practices, this March is a really good time to do it. And then letting yourself be open, experimental, let things fall into place, into more of a routine, maybe more end of April into May, and letting things be a little bit lighter in March and April, kind of getting things figured out. Okay, I think that's what I have. I don't think I have anything else, but definitely check out that last rising sign horoscope too if you're looking for more information on, what Venus might be refining and how that might be going down in the first and the second. But I really wanted to focus today on some of that rebirth and renewal that's not only going to be hitting the second house, but also your eighth and your third. And so it's really an opportunity. If you're not naturally seeing any kind of rebirths coming about on their own, it can be an option to kind of do that ourselves and say, yeah, I'm going to hit the reset button on these topics and try again or approach it in a new way. All right, everyone. I forgot to turn my lights on and then it got dark out. So I think I'm going to shut it down. Thank you so much for everyone's time in listening to this. And of course, if you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. If you have any concerns, comments if you're comfortable with that. Otherwise, you can always email me at aligninglight@gmail.com. Check out my website, www.aligninglightastrology.com. And that's where I have a ton of resources, my newsletter sign up, and ways to book me. So if you've enjoyed how I've broken some of this down today and you would like to do this specifically with your chart, definitely hit me up. And if you wait a few more days and sign up for my newsletter, I will have a discount code. So watch out for that. All right. Thank you, everyone. Good luck with your underworld journey. It's like I'm on one because it's so dark in here now. How appropriate. We started with the light and then the sunset and now I'm here in kind of a little bit more dim conditions. So that's appropriate. So good luck everyone with your descent and your eventual ascent. And I hope to see you on the other side, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed as a morning star. All right, everyone. Take care.